God, I don't even know where to start this video. It was so much easier to sit down and calmly write my thoughts on the story because I had like a proper, nuanced opinion of that aspect of this film. But visually, this thing is fucking incredible. We've spent so long analyzing and researching and looking into every single part of this film's production up until release. We knew it was going to be incredible. I did not expect it to be quite this good. Dragon Ball has never ever looked this good. Part of me kind of considered this kind of thing to be a bit of a dream, and I hope in a couple of years I can look back on this and go, wow, you were impressed by that? Look at where we are now. I don't think that's going to happen because this really is something quite special. Let's talk about some of the basic stuff here. Shintani is, of course, the new character designer. Let's talk about that aesthetic, because it really does just ooze over so much of this film. I know a lot of people were looking at his designs and worrying, is this going to make Dragon Ball look way too cartoony or young, or is it going to take away some of that intense edge that I really enjoy from the fighting? And that's not the case at all. I think some people who were maybe worried about his inability to get feature placement right with his quite high noses, nothing to worry about there. That is not in this film at all. In fact, everything that appears to be touched by him looks fantastic. In fact, the vast majority of the early sections are embodying his work perfectly, and they look so good, and we'll talk about that with some specifics later. What I found really interesting seeing the credits at the end of the film is that actually Shintani was not the only character designer on this film. We have a sub-character designer who is someone I love, and I almost screamed when I saw his name. It's Isamu Takara, who was a very big animator on One Piece. He was one of my favorite supervisors before he disappeared for like a year, and I think everyone thought he was dead or left the industry or something, but no. He's on this film as the sub-character designer, and if my eyes aren't deceiving me, I think he is also the third highest credited animator on this film. So while I have to admit, I don't think I really spotted anything that looked like him because I don't really know his style that well. I just really like how his character art looks in One Piece. He is a big presence on this film, and I really cannot wait to dissect this properly. As far as the storyboard goes, there's actually 3 different storyboard artists. You've got Kazuya Kurosawa, who was someone on Dragon Ball Super who typically did more reserved episodes. He usually worked with Yoshitaka Yoshima, who mostly did just solo stuff. It was usually very dialogue heavy. He did some action stuff towards the end of the tournament. I think one of the big examples of that is God Form Topo, or Top. And although that's not really what he does here, he mainly does dialogue stuff, he does an incredible job, and again, we'll talk about that. In the middle is Masato Mitsuka, who is arguably Super's best regular director. He did some of the most incredible episodes. I think about episodes like 94, I think about episode, 118 and 129, the debut of Ultra Instinct, which although, had a load of bank animation, the new stuff was fantastic. And then of course the final storyboard artist, the director of this film, Tatsuya Nagamine, who I believe handled the final fight and will of course have looked over and corrected and advised on basically the entire thing. So let's talk about the start of this film. There are a lot of supervisors, but I'll talk about them as we get there. This first section is supervised by Miyako Tsuji, who is a chief animation supervisor on Super. A lot of people were kind of iffy about her style, and it's not that different on this film, I have to say. She's definitely softened things up and the shading has largely gone away, but there are some scenes here and there that are pretty much ripped directly from her work on Super. So if you didn't like her style, you may be a little bit taken aback by some of this early stuff if you were really looking for a very distinct change to Dragon Ball's aesthetic. The film, as far as direction goes, pretty much smacks you in the face from the get-go. It begins with just the most intense lighting and like the craziest dramatic angles. There are so many, like when Frieza lands, there are so many distorted faces and manic expressions, and there's so much use of fisheye, which I think is really effective, especially when combined with those manic expressions. As far as animation goes in this section, there's not masses of animation. It's very dialogue driven, but I have to say some of the small motions are very bouncy and exaggerated, which is more than we are probably used to from Dragon Ball. So I definitely sat there thinking, wow, this feels a lot more alive than I'm used to. It's not totally motionless though. There is a big highlight at the beginning of Frieza blowing up snipers. It's mental. Like, he swings around, his tail just like smears everywhere, and he's like doing like the cool guy who doesn't stare at explosions thing where he like shoots someone behind him. You know, there's loads of really cool stuff like that, and it's executed to perfection. I really enjoyed it. It was a great way to sort of say, you know, okay, this bit of the film is quite limited, but look at what we can do. This is a very different Dragon Ball film. My favorite part of the opening though is the title sequence. You know, in the past films it was either some sort of headchalar thing coming in for like 2 seconds with a big cheesy 3D logo. That's not what happens here at all. Actually, it becomes really calm and you get this weird sort of montage of colors and space imagery, and it's littered with all these like really cool effects, and it's such a stark contrast to the breakneck speed of the opening because it lets you sort of relax a bit and take in everything. It's really cool, and especially with Sumitomo's score, which is just amazing. And that's got nothing to do with animation, but I really loved it. After the opening, you end up on planet Vampa, which is largely nighttime when you get there, and is very atmospheric. It definitely fits in nicely with that very calm, atmospheric look from the opening. I love that a lot. There isn't too much here again. It's very sort of subtle character acting stuff in this part, very dialogue driven. But when you move into the minus section and that culminates with Bardock taking on Frieza, you get, I guess, the first instance of, wow, that's modern. And that's when Bardock launches his final attack at Frieza, and he kind of, as he's getting engulfed by the big blast that, you know, ultimately kills him, he turns into like this super inky, very Kameda-esque brush stroke, which was really impressive. And I loved how sort of massive, he has like a massive gaping mouth as he's dying. So, you know, it's one of those moments where you're like, wow, okay, you know, we're really going with expression here. The film definitely kicks into gear, I think, animation-wise, and hits that production value that I think a lot of us were expecting once you move down to Earth and hit the present, because you get this bit with Goku and Vegeta training over the top of the water, and it kind of embodies everything that I think I wanted this film to be and what it definitely is. So it looks a lot like the model sheets. It's very round, it's very bouncy, you know, there's tons of fun camera work and lots of really cool water effects. It's the kind of thing that if Super came back and they wanted to do a lot of laid back action, this is the kind of thing I'd be really happy with. And even if they wanted to do it seriously, a small little adaptation of this with some more angles would be perfect. Like I said, it looks a lot like the model sheets, and so it's definitely a clear contrast between this sort of down-to-earth, no drama, happy action, and the more intense stuff later on. I think it really demonstrates the versatility of Shintani's designs that I've been, I guess, shilling so hard for months now. It's really cool. And I think what I love so much is that it's spliced in with loads of character acting, and I think character acting is really the biggest selling point of this section. Like, everyone is so bouncy, there are so many big wild expressions and lots of really fun and round looking artwork. I think round really is the key word here. Like, nothing stops moving in this point. Shintani said he was going to put a lot of focus onto the slice of life stuff, and if this is his handiwork, then that is definitely him. I think this is supposed to be where Takeo Ide takes over supervising, but I didn't really spot him, unlike Suji and Tate and some of the other supervisors on this film who are very obvious. I don't know if Ide maybe struggled, or maybe I'm just blind and not used to him in this style. Maybe it'll be really clear on Blu-ray, but I have to say, you know, from one cinema viewing, it didn't really seem like he was there, which was kind of strange. As far as stuff from trailers go that you will recognize, I don't know how to say his name, Mehdi Aouchaoui. He's one of the French Studio Yapiko animators. He mentioned that he did this Frieza shot from, I think it was trailer 1, but seeing it in the film, it's actually just like a little flashback of Frieza in the middle of a conversation of him like spinning around in his golden form, and it looks absolutely fantastic. It's definitely one of the coolest moments from this earlier section in the film. I do wonder if this section is all from Studio Yapiko animators, just because it is so alive compared to everything else. It's definitely one of the best sections as far as this sort of first half pre-battle stuff goes. Later on, the film cuts to the present on planet Vampa, which is where Broly and Paragus end up. And there's a bit where Paragus comes out of his cave that like really caught me off guard, because he's got like this big sort of bulging, distorted eyes, and he has like so much character as he's trying to like struggle to stand up and run towards the ship. Like, it says so much about like his state physically and mentally without actually saying anything about him at all, which I thought was really, really cool. And that kind of thing you see a lot, sort of characterization through movement. For example, once Cheelai and Lemmo take Broly and Paragus onto the ship, there's a really cool scene with Cheelai and Broly sort of interacting for the first time. So you have this sort of very bouncy, emotive, cute character, Cheelai, trying to sort of get along with this very sort of Tarzan, naive, almost babyish character in the form of this new Broly, who's so like... he's so nervous and curious, and it's animated to perfection. Like I said, you don't need a script here. It's just visually told to you, and I thought that was really, really cool. Some of the drama does come in a little bit later on in this section. There's a bit where Broly starts crushing a Frieza grunt who's trying to like cause trouble with Cheelai and Lemmo. The expressions there are so brutal. Like they do such a great job of selling how terrifying and uncomfortable that scene is. Like it's showered in all of these cool like electricity effects, for lack of a better term. It's very, very powerful stuff. I really, really enjoyed it. We move down to Earth again for where the actual fighting begins. This is where Takahashi's section begins. And I made a video saying, is he going to be causing issues with how different he looks in this film? Well, I can now answer that for certain. And so the answer is kind of, but nowhere near to the extent that I think I thought it was going to be, which has definitely made me really, really happy. So he's definitely looks really, really different in terms of shapes. So like, even though these early sections don't have much shading at all, and are clearly making an attempt to honor the character sheets, they still look like Buark designs, if you know what I mean. Like, there's none of the round shapes from like the entire movie before this are here anymore. It's all Buark, but the shading is kept minimal. And so, like I said, it feels like an attempt to stay within the spirit of those designs. And as the fighting sort of builds up to actually beginning, the shading starts to build up with it, and so it's not distracting at all. It's actually really gradual, and I thought it was done really, really subtly, and so I have no real issue with that section as far as the visual consistency goes. So as the fighting does kick off, I think this must be where Masato Mitsuka's storyboard happens, because like there is such a big emphasis on like long take zooms in and out and manic rotations, and it's some of the most visceral stuff in this movie, and it's the kind of thing you could see he really tried to do in Super, but obviously couldn't because one, the schedule, and two, limitations of a weekly TV show. When the action begins, it has a very, very distinct look to it. It's definitely not as fluid as the earlier stuff and the rest of this film, because I think when you have art this detailed, it definitely limits you, and that's why, I'll always push for a certain type of design for the sake of animation. So it is very pose to pose in the way it animates, but the sturdiness of it, the hand-to-hand combat, there's so much solidity to the action that it's just incredible all the same. It's such a great way to kick off the battle. There's a bit where Vegeta turns Super Saiyan, which is kind of bordered after the way he transformed into Blue in Resurrection F, except it's actually been animated really well, and they've done it interesting this time. Like, aside from the effects that kind of jump all around him and circle him and look just so good, the rotation itself of the camera isn't linear like it was in Resurrection F. It's sort of really smooth, but it has sort of this, I guess, ramped timing going on. Like, it doesn't just smoothly rotate around him. It's like, focus on this bit, spin, focus on this bit, spin, focus on this bit. It definitely grabs you by the throat and says, pay attention, in a really, really powerful way. I have to say, Takahashi as a supervisor is really, really overwhelming, in the sense that his corrections are basically total redraws. You've got people like Futoshi Higashide in here, Atsushi Nikaido, possibly even Jin Inaba since he's corrected, but you'd have a hard time telling who the hell did what because they've been totally redrawn. Yuichi Kurosawa, you also know him from Super, is also in this section, but he's one of the few people who you can actually tell whose scene it is because he has only been touched maybe a little bit. His scene is pretty lengthy, and I would say it's probably the snappiest of everyone's work on this film. There's a section that I think probably wasn't in between quite enough. It almost looked a bit awkward, but it's not bad. It just feels a little unfinished, and I think if that's the only complaint I have about the animation in this film, which really it is, then I think that says so much about the quality of this film. The transformation where Vegeta turns Super Saiyan God is just ridiculous. unbelievable. Like, he erupts in fire and his body rotates around at like mass speed, like a fucking spinning top. It's just phenomenal. And the bit after that, I think, might possibly be Higashida, just because it's like the most smooth part of this section. And that's always been one of the biggest tells for him on Super. Again, like I said, everything's been redrawn, so I actually don't know for certain. It'd be one of those things where I'd either have to frame by frame it on Blu-ray or maybe ask an animator, but it's really, really awesome. It kind of culminates with Vegeta getting a 1-up on Broly and launching a beam at him, and we kind of saw the end of this in the trailer where those like sketchy effects happened as the camera came towards his face. That whole scene is huge in terms of scale. Like, the water that he dives into, the effects look amazing, but it kind of shoots up around him and spins and just, it's nuts. And it follows up with Broly kind of emerging from the water, all raging, and then he attacks Vegeta, but I don't know who did that section, but because again, you know, it's so corrected. That marks the end of Vegeta's fight, but it's definitely not the end of Takahashi's section, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what comes in now is one of the greatest parts of this film, and to me the best scene by an absolute landslide. It is several minutes of pure animation, and I think it is probably the most my mind has ever been blown by animation in a cinema. This is Ryo Onashi's section, and it's just, it left me speechless. Genuinely, it left me speechless. It is his best work. Wholeheartedly his best work. It starts with the original teaser that we saw all of those months ago, but it's extended in little places here and there before launching into the real deal. God, the things this man does is just ridiculous. Like, there's a bit where Broly throws a kick from like across the landscape, and the camera just follows that kick right into the impact, which sends Goku like flying and bouncing and boinging all across this landscape, and he goes seamlessly into a Kamehameha. Like, so much of this is in one long take. It's mental. Like, nobody else on this film embraces these designs as much as Onashi. Like, it's astonishing. Everyone feels so alive. Like, even the cuts away to the spectators, people like Bulma and Whis and Frieza and Paragus reacting, they're so animated, they're so bouncy, and they feel alive. Like, it's the kind of, this sounds so ridiculous to say, but it's the kind of thing that almost moves me to tears with how good it is. Like, Goku seamlessly bounces from a Super Saiyan into his God form, and it's the nuttiest thing ever. Like, the whole movement changes. Goku kind of falls back on evading and using techniques rather than like the brutal strength you see at the start. It finishes with just this insane body slam into Broly, and man, I could talk for like 30 minutes about this scene. It is the greatest thing in this movie by a landslide. It is such an unbelievable career achievement for him, and I'm so happy that he got to work on this film. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be talking all about Takahashi's section, all about Shida's section, and I think that's such a shame because Onashi really deserves all of the praise on this film. Sadly, the thing that follows up here is not so good, and it really confirmed some of my fears about Takahashi's supervision. It jumps from Super Saiyan God Onashi to Takahashi Super Saiyan God, and it's so weird. I was almost relieved that his section of the film early on, although feeling pretty much like its own OVA in the middle of the film, was transitioning between sections really, really well. Like I said, there was a slow build up at the start, and then moving on to Onashi, it was a different fight, and it moved very, very convincingly. But here, it just jumps almost immediately from flat bouncy boy into big angular shading person. And, you know, the animation here is pretty great. I think it is Atsushi Nikaido's work, but it's so jarring. Thankfully, it is the only part of the film that is like this, but it does kind of suck that it exists all the same. Nikaido seems to do that same thing he did in episode 100 of Super, which is like that Hulk smeary thing from the Avengers that Kale did, though this time it's Broly doing it. I will say that animation doesn't really blend too well with these corrections, so there is a bit of a degree of stiffness that probably wouldn't exist, but it's not a massive deal. I think this whole section, much like the rest of the film, still looks absolutely outstanding, so although I found it a bit jarring and I'm a little concerned about how the corrections affected things, it still looks absolutely outstanding, and it is not a serious complaint in any way whatsoever. After this, I think you end up with Goku turning blue, which was just astonishing to see in a theater. Like it is covered in the most intense line work. Like effects are just flying everywhere. The expressions Goku has in his face are absolutely nutty. I think the final reveal, you know, when all is said and done and it, you know, pans up to his face, that isn't massively well animated. I'm 99.9% sure it is Hiroyuki Itai. You know, we got to see this a while ago, and I think everyone and their mother just went, yeah, that's definitely him. But it also follows up with a 3/4 shot that is also just so Itai that I would be blown away if I was wrong at all. He seems to animate a sort of Utapon-esque impact frame, which seemed really unusual for him, but that kind of thing is in this film quite a lot, so maybe that's something from Shintani, I don't know. But it moves into the first lengthy CG section. A lot of people were really worried about the CG in this film, myself included, but actually this bit in particular was really, really nice. The models look great, the animation is done with modulated timing, like 2D work, which means that, you know, for a fast movement you would use fewer frames, and for a slow movement you use more frames, rather than just, you know, doing it pose to pose and letting the PC interpolate between those frames and then bringing the frame rate down, which always just looks not good at all. It's got 2D effects in there that do a great job of selling the effect. There's also certain close-ups that have had sort of 2D work, I guess, composited on top of it, which really helps with blending it into the world. I think the only place where it does fall apart, and we did see this in the trailers, is that there are these really strange, bizarre instances of realistic CG. It's almost like someone spliced in, I guess, real life footage, or like CG that belongs with real life footage, because it feels so odd with the CG that's there already, but it also feels at odds with the movie's style as a whole. Like, this thing is all about 2D animation. Why would you then throw in realistic looking stuff? Definitely kind of strange, but at least it's not a major factor whatsoever. Naoki Tate comes in next, and I think this is where Nagamine starts boarding. He did say a lot of animators ignored his storyboard and just did what they wanted, and he was blown away with the results. So it's not like we have a real conclusive answer of what he actually contributed yet, but I don't know, it all looks great to me. I think Tate's artwork here is easily some of the best he's ever produced for this series. He works so well under these design sheets, and in fact, he's the only person who draws Vegeta on model outside of his coat. I don't think it's necessarily going to win over anyone who hated Tate full stop, because it's still very him. He is still Naoki Tate, the sort of crazy, bouncy, weird expressions animator, but I think it will at least shut up people who go on about how he can't draw, or that he sacrifices art for animation, which is just total nonsense. This section of the film is all about drama and comedy, and his corrections and animation are literally so perfectly suited for this that I can't imagine anyone else handling it. What surprised me was that Tate doesn't actually do that much action. There is the hand-to-hand stuff that we saw in the trailer that's a bit longer in the full film, and then there is an amazing bit with Broly and Frieza that has just like the nuttiest impact and amazing smears. But his biggest contribution is definitely in his character acting, you know, whether that be his own animation or his corrections. He definitely brings the absurdity of what's happening to life in such a great way. Before his highlight does come in though, you have Ryo Onoshi popping back up once again to handle Broly's Super Saiyan transformation, which is just nuts. Onoshi is the top credited animator on this film. He really does so much, and I love it. I think if you know Onoshi's work and you think about his character acting, imagine that attached to someone having a rage-filled breakdown, and I think you know what you're in for here. Picture that, but with like ridiculous effects raining from the sky, because that is basically what this scene is, and it's so cool. It leads into the second stretch of CG, which we also saw a little bit of in the trailer, and it was definitely the weakest part for me from the trailers, and it's definitely the weakest CG for me in this film. I don't know if it's just because the colors feel really bright and the glowing effects look very video gamey, but it definitely doesn't have that same feeling of CG wanting to look hand-drawn like some of the other stuff does. It's pretty short at least, but it does feel a little bit funky. This section ends with Goku and Vegeta teleporting away to Piccolo, and this is where Tate's highlight occurs, and it's by far one of my favourite parts of the film. It honestly had me crying with laughter. This whole scene is all about comedy. It's about Goku convincing Vegeta to fuse. Like, they mock each other, they like mimic the fusion poses and like push each other around and stuff. And it's got all of Tate's crazy expressions, and you know, he does like those hilariously exaggerated movements and poses, and it fits seamlessly. It is one of the greatest bits of comedy in this film, and it would not have been the same without his contribution. I'd say it's probably like a minute to a minute and a half long of just pure character acting. I love that that is what he got to do on this film. I think that says so much about either what he likes to do or how well the director knows how best to use his animators, because it really does just fit so perfectly. It's all interspersed with bits of Frieza getting this beaten out of him. I was really surprised to see such modern effects in this section. Like, the impact frames are extreme and super inky. Like I said, that's such a running theme. There is all kinds of cubic debris around here and amazing impact frames, like I said. I saw that Hiroki Moromune is in the credits, and he's one of the coolest animators at Toei, and this definitely has his MO. I don't want to say this is him for sure, because it's really hard to tell in a theater where you can't pause and look at things closely, but I would definitely not be surprised if this was his work. As all of this stuff goes on, you've got Goku and Vegeta desperately trying to fuse and continually f***ing it up. The art in this section is really distinctive. It reminds me so much of Shuichi Isaki's supervision from episode 16 of Super. Like, you've got those wild pointy noses and crazy big expressive eyes. I don't think I saw Iseki in the credits, but I know Shuichiro Minabe is on the film. I 100% saw his name. And this section, I mean, it could possibly be him. It has that kind of look that he would not be out of place doing, but I wouldn't be able to say for sure. Either way, it is seriously interesting, and I really can't wait to find out who it is. When they finally get to the end of messing up this fusion and they pull it off and Gogeta is born, holy shit, the effects are nuts. Like, the way he's formed is in this weird sort of whirlwind of color, and it sort of bursts into flames, and it kind of looks like a fiery serpent that sort of engulfs their entire body. It looks phenomenal. I don't think it's the coolest transformation in the film, but it definitely fits the sort of tone that this section is going for. So if you were looking for like a crazy big, holy crap, Vegeta is born, it's movie 12 all over again, you're not going to get that, but what you do get is tonally appropriate and still looks amazing. Following that, they do teleport back into the action, and you get a little bit more Tate supervision as Whis dodges away from Broly, and of course that does mean he draws Gogeta, so I was really happy to see a little Tate Gogeta for like half a second. But this is where the big boys come in. This is when Naotoshi Shida kicks off the battle, and oh my god, it's so long. Please don't clip that out of context. But yes, the scene is really long. Like, I swear to God, this man did like 3+ minutes of just straight action. I think what's amazing to me is that he really did stick to the character sheets in terms of the shapes of the characters. Like, this is Shintani through and through, but he still included his shading, which means that even though he's clearly on model, you can still tell that this is Shida. There's no compromise here, which I think is amazing. The actual animation is definitely Shida to a T. It's got that crazy camera work, the sort of snaking beams that the camera follows. You got all those crazy, wild, exaggerated poses, the big shaking, crazy heads, and it all runs at like 500 miles an hour that you'd expect from Shida. It is pretty awesome. I will not knock it at all. It is so technically proficient. But I have to say, if you were expecting Shida to do anything adventurous, you might be a little bit let down. You know, as someone who has seen every single thing from Shida for the past like 20+ years, he doesn't blow me away like he used to. I have seen this formula countless times, but I would be lying if I said it didn't still bring such a massive smile to my face. He is so good at what he does, and it works wonders in situations like this. You know, he is Mr. Climax animator. You know, if it's not broken, then why try and fix it? Despite its length, his section is split up by a little bit of CG. It concludes with this like mental Kamehameha clash that like breaks time and space, and they end up in this weird CG-filled trippy dimension. The CG here is solid enough, I think. You know, there is inky stuff in here, there is hand-drawn effects, and it has all the same pose-to-pose animation I spoke about before, but this is also where Broly hits his maximum form and Gogeta goes blue. For that to debut in CG was a little bit lame, even though the CG itself was fine enough, I probably would have liked to have seen that hand drawn by an animator, but that's just my own little prejudice, I think, towards CG and hand drawn films. Coming out of this though, you do jump straight back to Shida, and this is great. It's very different to his first part, which was all about manic, full force camera work, but this is a little bit more carefully considered. There's more focus on movement and effects rather than just assaulting your senses. So I think it's kind of nice that he was able to sort of take things down a notch and ramp down the action and all of this madness a little bit, because the tone of the fight does change at this point. Shenlong gets summoned, and so the entire world goes totally black, and it really brings about a very different atmosphere to that film. You get that thing from the trailer you saw, which is the homage of Broly from movie 8 powering up, and this, thanks to a private DM, I can now say for sure is Chikashi Kouta, and I was so happy because that is who I guessed in the breakdown the other day. He is the character designer for One Punch Man. His scene is so good, as you would expect. It's got that same sort of robust solidity to the action that Takahashi's part had, except this whole thing moves like butter. The final punch from him in this section is amazing. I know Kubota is not actually a webgen animator, but the crazy smooth lightning and smoke has all of the characteristics of that kind of thing, and it kind of just blew my mind. Again, there are so many things in this film that you just don't see from Dragon Ball, and I'm so used to seeing in high-end, amazing action shows in other anime. Seeing that in Dragon Ball just weirds me out, and I love it. I love that feeling, and I hope that stays if we get an eventual series, or at least another movie. Next up, though, is the big boy, Yuki Hayashi. His scene really is the most interesting part of this finale for me. It is so crazy. The expressions in this scene are absurd. You saw some of them from the trailers already, but God, they are really pushing the limits of what Dragon Ball can look like. I would argue possibly even pushing it too far with how much it does look like My Hero Academia in places. I will say I didn't really give it a second thought in the theater just because of how crazy his performance is on this film. Like, every single blow is littered with effects and hits with the force of a fucking galaxy-sized jackhammer. I actually learnt he almost didn't work on this film, and had that been the case, God, we would have missed out on so much. Like, genuinely, this scene is amazing. Following him is the man I accidentally thought Hayashi's scene was from originally, Yoshihiko Umekoshi. He is here. He happened to come right afterwards. He is, of course, the character designer for My Hero Academia, and he delivers the big Kamehameha to wrap up this fight. It's not the most outrageous scene ever, it's not packed with mental movement, but it has all of the cool little quirks you'd expect from Umekoshi, like the crazy wild eyes, and like the blast itself just has so much force. Like Hayashi, he is also really pushing the limits of what Dragon Ball can look like here. I'm very, very curious to see if fans react negatively to it, because really, we've never ever seen Dragon Ball look like this. It's really, really different. With that though, that is the end of the major fight. The final scenes have lots of cool atmosphere, the sun setting, effects raining from the sky and such. There is some cool character acting in the finale, but that is pretty much it for the film. That's not the end of the animation though. The credits actually have little animated snippets of characters from different animators on the film in all kinds of different styles. There's lots of awesome stuff in there. Like, some stuff looks like Shintani, some stuff looks like Takahashi, some stuff, I think Suji I recognized did a Gogeta shot. It really varies, and I think it's a really cool celebration of everyone who worked on this film. What's weird to me is that there are two supervisors here who are really distinctive, and that's Kodai Watanabe and Yukiko Nakatani. They are two very distinctive, very talented animators at Toei, and they are the two people credited with supervising the final section of the film, but I don't see their presence. I'm not sure I see their animation. Watanabe is usually really easy to spot, and I just didn't see him at all. Maybe I'm blind, or maybe they didn't do that much. You know, like I've said many times throughout this, it can be very difficult to spot people in real time in a theater. You know, you kind of have to be able to frame by frame through this stuff, and I won't have the opportunity to do that for at least a little while. Maybe when the Blu-ray comes out, or if I get lucky with like an early review copy or something. There's also a lot of other animators in the credits, people like Ken Otsuka and Hirotaka Nii and a lot of other people who I have to say I couldn't read yet. I'm going to try and sneak a little picture of the credits at some point this week. Hopefully I don't get arrested. But yeah, there's just so much going on in this film that it's kind of hard to really do this sort of breakdown in real time. That's why I'm calling this a first impressions. Nothing I say in this video is 100% accurate aside from the stuff I said is confirmed, so definitely wait for my proper breakdown once the Blu-ray is out for real information on this. I just hope I've really been able to convey verbally just how phenomenal the visuals in this film are. Like, it genuinely did blow me away. It is astonishing work, and I really just want to give a round of applause to the staff, honestly. It must have taken an astounding amount of effort and work to pull this off. I'm so happy that Dragon Ball has hit a point where it has managed to get a film like this. You know, I've said for years, we need new blood. We need to shed the old who have been holding us back for years, bring in the new, the people who talented animators are attracted to, because that stuff works. You know, we spoke so much about how when all these new designs came out, all of these big animators were praising them. You know, with Nagamine on board, that opens up a lot of doors. And I think this film really is just proof. It is conclusive proof that staff matter so much. I cannot wait to see this film again. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to stop the recording now and go and find when the next showtime is, because I just want to absorb this all again. It is just an insane visual drug. I think everyone is going to be so happy with the visuals, and any concerns that anyone had, bar the little niggles here and there that I spoke about earlier, you're going to be more than satisfied. Obviously, if you've heard my review, you know that the actual story is a little bit mixed, and if you want to hear my full thoughts on that, then of course, be sure to click the link on the screen. But otherwise, if you enjoyed this, be sure to hit that like button, leave a comment down below letting me know whether this excited you for the film, or if you have any thoughts at all about anything I've said, any sort of clarification you would like. I also have my first ever t-shirt out there, which is based around one of my favorite plot points in the film. It was done by the lovely Olympia. She has been such a joy to work with, and I absolutely love this final result. So if you'd love to support this channel or just pick up a really cool t-shirt for Christmas, then please go ahead and buy that. There is a link down in the description as well. But thank you so much for listening. This has been such a joy to just sit here and ramble about. I cannot wait until January when everyone gets to see this film and we can talk about it together. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.